My parents were very traditional and it was quite a strict upbringing. I didn't have a very good childhood at all outside the family home. I was bullied very, very badly, and there's a lot of trauma associated with that. I've got some very strong protective mechanisms, and it's just a matter of hanging on.
Today's guest is Mark Ellis.
As a result of the care that I've received from mental health services, local health districts, I will never go back voluntarily. Very early on in my life, I owned my own experience, then took responsibility for what was happening around me. It's about us. It's about the person I'm supporting. It's about the partnership. People that are facing different struggles live with a mental health issue. If I had to pick a hero, they would be my heroes.
Tell us about owning your own shadow.
I've got some very dark times that I've lived through, but I've always come out the other side.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Peer for Peer podcast. They are dedicated to conversation and storytelling about peer work and the people with lived experience in the mental health industry. Today's guest is Mark Ellis. He is the National Service Lead for Suicide Prevention Peer Workforce Support Services at Roses in the Ocean. He is a lived experience advocate, mental health and suicide prevention peer worker with 30 years of experience supporting people with complex and enduring mental and emotional distress. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Hey Rob, how are you going?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for speaking with us for your time. Could we start off with your view of the following quote by Lucius Seneca? I'm sure you've heard it before. Sometimes even to live is an act of courage. Tell us your view, but how do we get ourselves into this situation where just being alive takes courage?
Yeah, I think for me, it's something that it's a very personal thing for me. That quote I can take very personally because I know it takes a lot of courage for me to keep going. Some days, over some period. And I know many of the people that I support and work with experience the same thing. So it's people often think that people that are facing different struggles, if you want to put a label on it, live with a mental health issue, a weak or struggle or are a victim. But I actually see it as actually, they're very courageous, essentially if I had to pick a hero, they would be my heroes. That's what I see as truly heroic.
Yes, that ability to keep going, it truly is heroic. And in your opinion, what are some of the reasons as to why mental and emotional distress can last, to keep going? It seems to linger for some of us. And I was just wondering if you had any idea as to why it sort of sticks around for so long sometimes.
Yeah, I think some people, outwardly anyway, some people seem to shrug things off and cope very well. But I think underneath many people, if not everyone, actually struggles with, life's challenges. Life throws curveballs at us all. I think ultimately the way we react and the way we respond is a result of our environment, our upbringing, our experiences early in life, any trauma that's come along our way. Yeah, so, and I think it's a mindset as well.
So, of course, you're saying that, sorry to interrupt, but you're saying that things can change and you can get better, in inverted commas.
Yeah, better's a strange term for me, but because I think of it more as being on a continuum. For instance, if we're talking about mental health, we all have mental health and it's on a continuum. For me, yeah, personally, I know that I've got some very dark times that I've lived through, but I've always come out the other side. I've got some very strong protective mechanisms and coping factors to help me get through, and it's just a matter of hanging on. And I've developed some strategies over the years. I've got fantastic supports around me. Not everyone is blessed to have those things, and I think because of that, they probably struggle a little bit more. I've also, very early on in my life, I owned my own experience and then took responsibility for, what was happening around me. And I think once I started to do that, I was able to unpack all the extra baggage that other people had given me that didn't belong to me. Yeah, and it's just been a long process, and it'll be a lifelong process.
Yes, that's what you sort of touched on. Sort of my next question there. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your childhood. Were you raised in a good community, and was there any family experience with suicide?
Yes, there was. I didn't find out about that until later on in my life, but that did affect my childhood. My experiences within my family itself, I suppose my parents were very traditional, and it was quite a strict upbringing. I didn't have a very good childhood at all outside the family home. I was bullied very, very badly, and there's a lot of trauma associated with that. Basically from the age of 5. I think it wasn't until I actually took hold of that and accepted it for what it was.
And to go back to the original question, that really does take courage, doesn't it? It really does, like, to own your own story, own your own shadow is what I've heard it called. Could you tell us about the shadow, owning your own shadow?
Yep. Okay. So for me, owning, if I think of the way you just put that, I'm very aware that I have a shadow. If I look at my shadow, if I use the analogy, if you look at your shadow, most often you'll fall over. You can't walk straight ahead and be looking at your shadow generally if it's behind you. It just causes complications in your life. So for me, I don't focus on my shadow, but if I sense it becoming more apparent in my life, I acknowledge it, and then I start to ask questions around why is it more present in my life at the moment? Why am I struggling today? And then I can look at using the things that I've got around me to actually refocus, and be thankful and be grateful. But in saying that, sometimes, I've had many experiences where gratitude's just not enough. You can have all this head knowledge and you can know things in the depth of your heart, but it's just not the way you're feeling. So that's also another time when courage comes in.
Absolutely. Speaking about courage, have you spent time in a psych ward, and what was your experience like with that? Do you think, is it still a necessary step for people to take?
Yes, I have. It was incredibly traumatic. As a result of the care that I've received from mental health services, local health districts, in regards to my care, I will never go back voluntarily. I think that it's had a massive impact on my life. So, but I've had to take responsibility as well. I don't think that the mental health system or community mental health services are necessarily the be all and end all. A lot of distress is associated with, social drivers or, issues within the community in people's lives, and it's got nothing to do with a mental health service. So often many people, if, they're having thoughts of suicide or struggling with life, and they think the only thing they've got is going to ED, but the driver behind things is a relationship breakup, not seeing their kids, finance, no accommodation, that service can't help them. Yes, they're having these thoughts, they're having these struggles, but that's not the place to go. So yeah.
Yes, so you actually meet a lot of people that are in distress, and how would you describe the importance of deep listening and holding the space for people in distress?
Well, that's incredibly important. I mean, I suppose it's one of the three things that I remind myself constantly I'm reflecting on whenever I'm working as a peer worker or a suicide prevention peer worker. It's not about you talking, it's about the other person talking, and it's about listening to be able to understand or attempt to understand their experience. I mean, you can never truly understand what someone else is going through, but you can hear them explain their struggles and their anguish and their pain. If you don't listen deeply to understand, you can't truly validate somebody's experience. And then the other side of deep listening is you've also got to be comfortable with the big emotions that, are ever present in the distress, the emotional distress that the other person has. So, and be able to be comfortable in that space, actually know that it's not your own distress. So at the same time, you're listening deeply, but you're sort of balancing off all these emotions. And the more silence I've found I can give people, and it's just a gut feeling I get as I support people, the better it is for them. I quite often call it a pregnant pause. If you're quiet long enough, somebody more often than not will start opening up again.
Yes, because they're sort of gathering their thoughts again, and then something else will be remembered, and they'll speak about that.
Yeah. So deep listening for me is a huge. It's an essential for peer workers for me. Yeah.
And what about, Mark? What about spirituality? How does that play a role in peer work when dealing with people with suicidal thoughts? How does that come in, or does it come into play?
It can. And over the years, it has done many, many times. For me, I'm led by the person, their beliefs and their concept of spirituality. So again, I suppose it's over the many, many years, I think it's been a sort of a journey, and I learn from every single person that I support and every person that I've got the honor to be with. And many people, are on, if you wanted to put them on a spectrum, some people will be one end, and have a belief in one system, and somebody else will have an exact, opposite belief. I suppose it's also a little bit like being able to sit with uncomfortable emotions or other people's distress. You've got to acknowledge that just because somebody else has a spiritual belief that doesn't meet yours or your worldview, it's not, I don't discount it. That's their understanding, and it's my job to connect with them through their spiritual belief if it's needed and relevant.
Absolutely. So, on a slightly different topic now, what sort of problems does the traditional support system have in dealing with suicide?
Um, Sorry for laughing at such a serious topic, but you know, I mean, we're going through a time when we're trying to make some serious reforms, you know, to the suicide prevention strategy and whatnot in Australia. I think one of the big things that I've found um, in supporting people directly is the length of time that people can be supported on programs. So that's the number one for me. You know, generally they'll have, say, a 12-week deadline.
And if you're not healed by then, you get to the end of the
Yeah, exactly. You know, and we're not, we don't all live in boxes. So some people are quite happy to find their own way before that, and others need additional support, you know. So I think there's also issues with the way that people can access services. So what services they need, you know. For me, I think it would be awesome to have some sort of contact point in every community where people can go and get the assistance they need. You know, if they're feeling distress, having emotional distress or having thoughts of suicide, where they can go for support and just to map out actually what's happening for them. So, you know, in New South Wales, they're called safe spaces. You know, there's not enough of them. They're not open enough hours. They're probably not always staffed by the right people. You know, they're connected to mental health services or health services to start with. So that's a fundamental flaw if they're a non-clinical alternative. You know, so I think there's many issues, you know, and again, we're all individuals. So, you know, I mean, for me, I just wish we'd move away from this, move away from this individualized direction that we've gone on, this selfishness that we've sort of, or self-centeredness, you know, that pathway, and we've moved away from sort of a community-focused idea. For me, it's very much, I've noticed over the years, as we've moved away from a community-focused society and towards more of an individualistic society, or people living, you know, on their own and only focusing on their own, that there's more problems, more people struggle, you know. We're being put together to interact with each other. And unless we support each other as a collective, I don't think we can truly heal. So, yeah.
Yeah, you were talking about, you know, you used that quote about leaving your ego at the door, and I love that one. It's just so hard.
Hard in achieving it, or hard from the perspective that it's, you know, confronting?
Yeah, I suppose it's both, because I think, you know, as children, we're raised, you know, sort of putting so much value on my ego, me, you know, me. And I know that sort of, you know, Eastern philosophies have sort of crept in a little bit, talking about trying to do something about our egos. Do you think that's an issue that society faces these days, of having an ego that's too inflated?
Yeah, for sure. For me, I mean, I think one of the other things that peer workers have to have is, you know, a very healthy dose of humility. So, you know, it balances out the ego. But, you know, you leave your ego at the door. It's not about me. it's about us. It's about the person I'm supporting. It's about the partnership or the connection that we're making. And if it's if it's a game of one-upmanship or if it's a competition, you're just not being an effective peer worker. You're not being you're not having an effective relationship in any way with anyone if you're letting your ego rule. So I definitely believe that the focus on self and ego and the desire to always please self immediately is a huge problem.
Let's talk a little bit about your work, if you don't mind, at Roses in the Ocean. The first part of the question would be sort of how the work there has helped you with your own mental health and growth. And the second part of the question would be, I'm aware that you do training. What types of training do you provide there?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I learn from every single person that I interact with. So to start with, everyone at Roses has a lived experience of suicide. So you're constantly seeing people going through different stages within their life and struggling with different things. So that for me, I try and be incredibly reflective and thinking about every conversation I actually have, every interaction I have with the people I work with. So I find that very beneficial because it keeps me out of my own head, and it also, as we were talking about earlier, keeps me away from focusing on my shadow and supporting others. I think also just the fact that I've been able to interact with other people over time through Roses, whether it's other peer workers that I'm mentoring or, other, whether it's clinicians in organisations, in local health districts, I've been able to see both sides. I've been able to see, I've been able to learn from other people's struggles as well. So there's, I'm always learning. I don't think honestly, I don't think you stop learning until the day you take your last breath. But, or for me, that's going to be my goal. And then onto the training at Roses. So in relation to the stuff that I look after, so initially there's suicide prevention peer work training, so specific training. That's divided into like 3 streams, if you like. So you've got crisis, carer, and bereaved. And that's for services or people, peer workers that are working as suicide prevention peer workers. They've already done some training, Cert 4 or IPS, and, they're just trying to focus their skills more on working to support people with suicidal thoughts. Or sorry, I should say thoughts of suicide. We've also got another version, which is community care companion training. That focuses on for volunteers. So if they're working, we've got a program going at the moment with community safe spaces around Australia. So the volunteers that get involved in that, that's an excellent program for them. Then we've also got one-on-one mentoring for peer workers, and we also run co-reflection groups and community practice groups.
Yes, fantastic. Quite a lot of courses. I wanted to ask you, in a previous conversation, you mentioned motivational interviewing. Could you explain what you understand about that?
Yes. So for me, I have a blend of a whole lot of things I use, I suppose, when I work with people. I frame everything as a question, even if I'm making a statement. I find it's a lot easier for people to accept. And really, for me, when I work as a peer worker, motivational interviewing, I'm asking the other person to unpack their story, and I'm doing it in a way that shapes their answer or makes them refocus their attention from the struggle they're going through to, one of their strengths. So
Fantastic. I love that type of interviewing. It's very clever. Thank you so much for that. And finally, I think what I'd like to ask you about also in a previous conversation, you were talking about the intersectionality within the experience of suicide. Could you talk a little bit about that?
yes. So I suppose there's multiple levels, but if you're looking at it from the perspective of someone who's cisgendered and traditionally white Australian, that's the stock standard view that many people get. You have the blinkers on. They don't consider the concept and the struggles that people have if, for instance, an Aboriginal man who's gay, so he's got struggles, through his experiences with, being an Indigenous Australian. Then he's having, issues in relation to his, sexuality. He could live in a remote community, so there are even more issues. All this starts to cross over and creates more of an issue and places him at more of a disadvantage than somebody in a metropolitan area, and then you've got all the other things that come into that as well. So the other intersectional sort of lines or divergences, he could have lost his job. He could have no accommodation. He's lost connection with his family, which is a huge one. So yeah, the impact that you've got to really consider the whole person and the whole picture. If you're focusing just on the person sitting in front of you or on the screen or on the end of a phone or however you're supporting, and not the broader picture around them, you're not really listening deep enough, I suppose. And you're not asking the right questions. You're not allowing the person to unpack it in their own time. Yeah, so I hope that sort of goes some way to explain intersectionality. Sorry, get my mouth around it. From my perspective as a peer worker.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a very important point. Of course, seeing the broader picture, absolutely. And look, and finally, Mark, thank you so much again for your time. You seem to be a very, very experienced man. And could you tell us about work at Roses in the Ocean, how long you've been there, and also to finish off, could you tell us, why would a person come to Roses in the Ocean?
I'll start by answering the second bit because it's the best organisation I've ever worked for.
Right.
It's a joy to come to work every day, and the ability to work with others, with everybody that shares the same values, so it just makes it so much easier and so enjoyable. I've only been with Roses probably, I've been involved in different areas. So I've sat on their lived experience advisory group for a while. I've then worked more on sort of a part-time basis for quite a long time on their Safe Space project. And then most recently, I suppose about a year ago, I came on full-time in the role I'm doing now. Yeah, but I certainly hope that I stay with Roses, until the day I actually grow up and decide there's something else I want to do in my life. Yeah, so.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today, Mark, and more importantly, thank you for the magic work that you do. I really appreciate how you really help people in distress. Thank you so much, and thank you for speaking with us today.
Thanks, Rob.
My name's Robert Nobilia. Thank you for joining us on this Peer for Peer podcast. See you next time.